How many weapons has Britain really supplied to Israel during the genocide in Gaza? And could it actually stop these exports, even if it really wanted to? Joining me today is my colleague John McAvoy, who's done extraordinary research on the scale of UK arms exports and the extent of American control over Britain's arms industry.
Thank you for having me back, Phil.
John, it's great to have you with us again. And today we're talking about this incredible investigation you've just done for Declassified, where you expose both the scale of UK arms exports to America, which could then be shipped on to Israel, and also this remarkable situation where it appears that the UK can't even stop these weapons going to the US, even if it wanted to, because the US seems to own the supply chain of spare parts for Israel's most advanced fighter jet, even when they're being made in the UK. Just talk us through how you did this research and what you found.
The F-35 jets used by Israel have been directly linked to war crimes in Gaza, including an airstrike on a refugee camp in a designated safe zone, killing 90 people. Keir Starmer's government, back in September this year, announced some arms restrictions to Israel, and that included not sending or not allowing exports of F-35 components directly to Israel, but it would continue to allow F-35 components to end up in Israel via a third country. So what we've done is we've reviewed these cargo documents, and we've effectively tracked, insofar as possible, the shipments that have gone from RAF Marham, which is kind of the centre of the F-35 programme in Britain, and then being exported from Marham via Heathrow Airport on cargo planes to various different military sites across the US. The US is a key supplier of the Israeli Air Force's F-35s. And the main kind of delivery address of the F-35 components that are being sent from Britain is Fort Worth. It's the Lockheed Martin's Air Force Plant 4, which is basically the epicenter of F-35 production in the US. And this has been a kind of key site for the procurement of Israel's F-35s over the past 8 or so years. When Israel got its first fleet of F-35s, they were kind of presented to them at this very site in Fort Worth. A number of kind of high-level Israeli officials went over for the ceremony, including the head of the Israeli Air Force, I think the chief of the defense staff as well, to kind of be presented with their F-35s. So, as I said, most of the components are going to this site, which is key in the supply chain for Israel. And I think we can quite accurately surmise from that these parts that are going from Britain to the US, many of them are likely being onward exported to Israel and being used in the current genocide.
And those British parts that we're aware of for the F-35 fighter jet include things like the ejector seat, the rear fuselage, or the tail of the aircraft, certain electronic components. There's even a bomb release cable that's made in the UK. So it's it's over 15%, possibly 20% of each F-35 is made in the UK. There's around 100 companies involved, including big names like BAE Systems, other companies like Martin Baker. And as you said, what happened in September was Keir Starmer, David Lammy, they suspended direct exports of those components to Israel. And you found that actually, we talked about this in the previous video, prior to that suspension, there had been shipments going directly to Israel. You found 7. The government have now confirmed it was actually as many as 14. So that was stopped in September, going directly to Israel. But it's still, these companies are still allowed to export to Israel via the US. And you found that there have been around 100 shipments to the US of F-35 spare parts since that suspension, and around 500 since the war began in October last year.
It's not just the Fort Worth site. There's also the Defense Logistics Agency site in Tracy in California. And the Defense Logistics Agency basically functions as various different hubs across the US. And from these hubs, they kind of distribute military components, but they're also a kind of key player in the F-35 distribution process. And the Defense Logistics Agency has quite openly noted in its annual reports that it contributed to the surge of F-35 components being supplied to Israel following the Hamas attack in October 2023. So a lot of these components from Britain are going to these distribution sites, and once again, quite likely are being onward exported to Israel, and they're still being used in war crimes. And the use of British military bases in this supply chain could hold, British ministers and British military officials complicit in war crimes.
Another really disturbing aspect of what you found, John, is that if the UK did want to do a full embargo and say, well, we're not even going to export these F-35 parts to the US because they might go onto Israel, it looks like they might not actually even be able to do that because the US government claims that it owns these spare parts as soon as they're made, even if they're being made in the UK. Could you just talk us through that side of the story as well?
The kind of entire F-35 distribution or supply chain is a lot more complicated and a lot murkier than we previously knew. And that issue is that, the US Department of Defense effectively owns all of the spare parts that go into the global hubs for the F-35 program. Even the parts produced in Britain, even the parts produced in other countries, these are all technically legally owned by the Pentagon. And this is, as Sam Perlo-Freeman from Campaign Against the Arms Trade told us for this story, this represents a major concern over sovereignty in general for Britain, right? If all of these parts are being produced in Britain, yet they're not legally owned by, the companies themselves or the UK government, then what power does Britain actually have over the supply chain itself? And that should be not only raised as a national security issue for Britain in general, but it's also a problem of responsibility when it comes to these exports, because the UK government now has not only admitted that these parts are technically owned by the Pentagon, the US Department of Defense, but they're trying to, shirk responsibility for what happens to them afterwards because they technically don't own them anyway. So it's a bit of a ridiculous position that the UK government has got itself into here, and it raises major and concerning questions over the F-35 global program in general.
And this is something that the lawyers who we've interviewed on this channel before from Global Legal Action Network and Al Huq are challenging at the High Court in London, this specific issue of the so-called F-35 carve-out. So it'll be interesting to see where that litigation goes, what else it reveals through the process. I believe Palestine Action, who traditionally have been targeting Elbit, Israel's largest arms company, since the embargo on drone components, they seem to have been targeting F-35 suppliers more instead. So it looks like there's going to be mounting pressure on the government over this issue. I think more and more MPs are asking questions about it as well. But I think your work's really important, John, because it maps this all out for the first time, shows the scale, shows the sites that the parts are going to into the US, which, like you say, are known to supply Israel's F-35 fleet, and of course raising this issue of could the UK actually stop it even if it wanted to? Who is in control of Britain's arms industry? Is it Westminster or the White House?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose a key point is nothing really overwrites Britain's obligations to prevent genocide, right? So even though there are concerns over ownership of the supply line itself, it's very, very, very obvious that the UK government is not living up to its obligations to prevent genocide in Gaza, and I think that's the key point, really.
Thanks, John. Well, I know you're going to keep ploughing away at this issue of the F-35s. There are more stories in the pipeline. So I encourage people who haven't subscribed to this channel already to click the button below so you don't miss out on the next installments in this investigation. You can also support the work we do at Declassified by donating through the Super Thanks button or joining us on the website. Thanks again for watching.